if you were Arch Manning, would you go to play for Nick Saban, or would you live out your father's dream that was taken from him at Ole Miss and go play for Lane Kiffin? A lot of people are asking this question. A lot of people are, if I was Arch, this is what I'd do, on message boards all over the 24/7 network and beyond. Well, what would you do? Everyone's got an opinion on this. Why should you and I be any different? What would you do? Let's say you got offers, and he does. He can go wherever he wants to. So Arch Manning, you could go play for Steve Sarkisian at Texas. You could go, like we said, fulfill legacy potential there at Ole Miss under Lane Kiffin. You could go to Alabama and play for the greatest of all time, as he's currently in a dynasty run at Alabama. You could go play for Kirby in Georgia. They just won a national championship with, let's be delicately kind but honest about this, far lesser caliber quarterback play than you could potentially offer. Where do you go? Well, I think firstly, it depends on how much that whole legacy thing matters to you. Sometimes it is actually the case that legacy means a whole lot, and the stuff that fans look at and value is the same stuff the player values. But I've also observed, probably more so on the other side of the coin, situations where a fan base or just the overall college football public assumes that something matters to a kid, and then it doesn't. And you never really knew it because the kid never really came out and said it, but people behind the scenes end up finding out, wow, that thing that we thought was going to factor in so much, turns out it didn't factor in at all. How much is legacy going to factor in here? Because to me, that determines what kind of legitimate shot Ole Miss has. We think it matters a lot, therefore we think Ole Miss has a very good shot. So let's bookmark that, because we can't know until the decision is made. Let's say outside of Ole Miss, I just stated the opinion about Ole Miss. Let's say it were to come down to a Georgia, Texas, Alabama battle. Just for the sake of argument, I'm not saying that that's official or anything like that, but just for the sake of argument. Let's say it's Dogs, Tide, and Longhorns. I am of the opinion that you go wherever the questions that you don't have control over have been answered most definitively. So my thinking is this. Even if you're an all-world quarterback or an all-world position player, doesn't matter, all this still resonates and still stands. There are things you do control, your work ethic and how you perform in the classroom and your attention to detail, those things you control. You control your physical development outside of getting injured in a freak nature. You control a lot of stuff. But there are also things outside your control. Who your offensive coordinator will be, who your quarterback's coach will be, the talent that will surround you. Some of that's outside your control. The overall direction of the program, the culture of the program, a lot of that's outside your control. And so if I were Arch Manning, if I were a guy with options, and certainly at the quarterback position, if I'm a guy with options, I'm going to look around and I'm going to think about an offensive, not only a philosophy, but an offensive reputation. Where have they definitively answered that question? That kind of question that I may not have control over. Well, they've absolutely done it at Alabama. I don't have any doubt about Steve Sarkisian in either of those categories at Texas. They have answered it at both places. I think from a culture standpoint, that's where Bama would have the edge over Texas, and I don't think Texas fans would argue that. Now, here's where it gets interesting. How do you answer that with Georgia? Because Georgia just won a national championship. So there's certainly no culture question at Georgia, but in terms of the offensive-related questions that are outside your control, i.e., how are you going to be utilized? I have no doubt that Arch Manning would go to Georgia and succeed. I have no doubt that Georgia, if and when he arrived there, would fashion their offense around him. But if we're comparing place versus place versus place, a couple of places, especially at Bama, they already have done it, whereas at Georgia, I think they would do it. They just proved they can do it without truly elite quarterback play. That doesn't mean they wouldn't change things if they did have an elite quarterback. But at Steve Sarkisian's Texas program now, that's also a place where even though you could reasonably say to me, Josh, they hadn't proven anything, I'd say, yeah, I know. And you can say, well, Sark hadn't done anything as a head coach like he did as a coordinator at Alabama. Yeah, I know. I just happen to have faith that he would. So if I were a quarterback, if I were Arch Manning, I wouldn't have the kind of doubt maybe that some fans, maybe the college football public, if you will, does about Texas. I would go wherever they've answered those questions most definitively. To me, that either is Alabama or it's an Alabama-Texas thing. That's me. You asked me where I'd go, so that's probably where I would go. He's not going to go wrong with any of these, is the side point.